spooky friends, and welcome to another episode of the Scariest Podcast.
Woo!
I'm Robin Grace, and this is Adam Diaz.
Hello.
And today we are going to talk to you, or chat at you, now I'll chat between each other, about some cool topics.
Indeed we are.
I think it's cool anyway, I don't know.
This week I'm going to be covering the Montauk Project, which is definitely a conspiracy theory that I had to get out my murder board for. What are you going to be covering this week?
I am going to be continuing my season of serial killers, and today I'm going to do Jeffrey Dahmer.
So this is the second week in a row you told me you're going to cover John Wayne Gacy.
Yeah, and I changed it.
And you changed it, so I think we can all say, poor John Wayne Gacy for the first time ever. Not really, F that dude. But that's super interesting. I really like the serial killer aspect of it because I knew who they were, but I don't know a ton about them because as much as I'm into true crime and like listening to My Favorite Murder like the rest of us, I've never like heard them cover like the big ones, you know? So it'll be super fun. If you're tuning in to hear some homegrown horror, those are actually on our Storytime episodes, which come out on Fridays. If you want to watch us record them live, you can go over to youtube.com/scarish, or you can go to twitch.tv/scarish podcast every Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and watch us. Robin, what is a homegrown horror?
So a homegrown horror are the tales of paranormal, supernatural, ghosty, horror type things that have happened to you. Sometimes we get really funny ones where they're just coincidences, like lights turning on and off, but it's just light switches or things like that. It's
like
just
bad
fun.
wiring. Last week we had one that someone thought it was a home invasion, but it turns out it was just their husband coming home early.
Yeah.
And they like slammed the door on them super hard and locked them out of the house and ran to their bedroom
Yeah.
with their kids. They're really good sometimes, and sometimes we have like supernatural ones that are actually like really scary. So
Right.
tune in for those. They're very fun. And if you have a story you would like to send us, please send us your story. You can email storytime@scarish.com. Go to any of our social medias. We have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that fun stuff, or our website, scarish.com. You can click on Contact Us and send us an email from there, or you can go to any of our social medias from our website because we have links to all of them. So we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much to everyone who reaches out. We get stuff through every channel. Like we get stuff through Instagram, we get stuff through Twitter, we get stuff through Facebook a lot more than all the other ones, I think. But Instagram has really been stepping it up, so shout out to the Insta crowd, and yeah, we get a lot of stuff, and we appreciate every single one of them, and we will try and read every single one of them if we can. I think that's about it for the normal intro stuff, though, so I guess I can just dive feet first into the topics. I'm pretty sure I'm going to go first this week, correct?
Yeah.
All right. So this week, I knew I wanted to do something specifically about a location. That's what kept coming into my head. I thought maybe a haunted house or a graveyard or something like that, but I kept coming back to the same idea. And maybe this is just because of my awesome flash fiction I wrote like 2 episodes ago about the Upside Down. Or maybe it's because I just read that season 4 will be the final season of Stranger Things, which makes me kind of sad. But I decided that I was going to go back to one of my least traveled roads, like I said, the conspiracy theory road. So now that I have this murder board all dusted off and filled with research, I present to you, my spooky friends, the Montauk Project. So, before we get going, I will say that the reason the conspiracy road is one of my least traveled roads is primarily based on the fact that there's about 1 million conspiracy theories out there. There really are. Like, you can look up a conspiracy theory on just about anything, and most of them, for the most part, are kind of bullshit, if not total bullshit. So, take this topic with a big grain of salt, obviously, but there are instances where conspiracy theories turned out to be true. It is rare, but not as rare as would make me comfortable. I prefer for my conspiracy theories to be fake and not like, oh, wow, that one was confirmed, and that one was terrifying. And the Montauk Project is one of those things that I've always sort of heard about, mainly through like crazy uncles or coworkers, but never really dived that deep into myself because I knew it was, you know, a rabbit hole that I'd be getting down. I'm like kind of obsessed about details, so I need to find some stuff out. Previous research that I've done on our show has actually had me dip a toe slightly into this, and I'll get to that connection because it is very much connected to another topic that I have covered. And like I mentioned, the Montauk Project is very much an inspiration for the Netflix series Stranger Things. So just by saying that, you'll kind of get an idea of what I'm about to cover. Like, picture some of the favorite things, the more iconic things in Stranger Things, and I think your mind's eye is going to be in the right place to receive all of this truly crazy shit I'm about to spew at you.
Little girls with mental powers.
It's not a little girl, but we're going to get there. And man, is this shit crazy. Okay. One thing I want to mention about this whole thing, and I mean this, like I'm not just saying this to hype this up, but it was shockingly difficult to locate information on the events, the location, and the folks involved with the Montauk Project. Because, like, what happened there is always going to be a part of speculation because of conspiracy theories, but this place did exist, you know, and something did go down. And I was pretty shocked at when I researched how much I was getting directed specifically to conspiracy theory sites, and even like deep Googling where you click to like the second, third, fourth, fifth page of Google. Like, I'm pretty sure once you get to the sixth page, you're on the dark web. Like, I don't know how to get there, but I'm pretty sure that's the path. It's like getting through the Lost Woods in Zelda. But I was like, wow, there's really not a lot of like official information or like what the government has officially stated happened there. They pretty much just let the conspiracy theories out there and nothing else. Like, I couldn't find a whole lot of official word except for like denials on stuff.
Okay.
So I was like, that is kind of suspicious to me, and it kind of creeped me out a little bit. And I'm not saying this took like a ton of digging. I mean, clicking through Google a few times isn't a bunch. But it's, you know, most of the time when you Google stuff like that, you find stuff that's fairly famous and you get an abundance of stuff. So it's not nearly as much as I would imagine. And as a side note, do you want to know how much Stranger Things was inspired by the Montauk Project?
How much?
Its working title when it was being developed was literally Montauk. They didn't name it Stranger Things until after they were done shooting.
Wow.
Yeah, and you're going to, when I go through these details, you're going to be like, wow, that shit sounds like Stranger Things. The story here really starts with the place known as Montauk, New York. If you've never seen where it is, it's located on the easternmost part of Long Island. For those of you who aren't familiar with the territory of New York, there's New York, which is part of the continental United States, and then Long Island is an island that's like just off the tip of New York where it touches the Atlantic Ocean. But
is it part of the state, Long Island?
It's
okay.
Long Island is part of New York, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, so Montauk is like the easternmost tip of Long Island. And I was shocked to find out as I was doing this that it's actually not very big. And when I say not very big, I'm going based off of the 2010 census. The population was 3,326 people in this town. That's 2010. That's recent, you know. The town I'm from, which I consider to be a small town, is Valparaiso, Indiana.
It is small.
It has roughly 33,000 people in it.
What?
So it's about a tenth of the size of Valparaiso. And again, this is using the 2010 census. And the thing that I thought was shocking is I was like, oh, well, Montauk is probably just smaller as far as area goes. It's actually larger than my hometown of Valparaiso on the map. So I'm just like, okay, cool. Like, this is sincerely a really small town. Again, that feeling that you get when you watch Stranger Things, which takes place in a fake town, which could just be called Podunk, which is, by the way, in Indiana. So
Podunk is a town in Indiana?
No, the town in Stranger Things. But yeah, they should basically all be called that. So low population. What does that matter? Well, if you wanted a perfect place to do some crazy experiments and get away with it, this is kind of perfect. And in the early 80s, rumors started floating around that some weird shit was going on down at Camp Hero. That's the name of the camp, which is, let's be real, it's a pretty solid name. Camp Hero rolls off the tongue. There was also speculation that bizarre things were in the works over at Montauk Air Force Station, which is in the town, which is already very, very small. Now, Camp Hero, just for reference, is part of a state park. And in Camp Hero, so on government-owned land, there is a government facility that these rumors centered around. And if you want to get an idea of what we're talking about, check out our Instagram at Scarish Podcast, because I'm definitely going to be posting pictures. Every topic episode, we post pictures, which also gets shared to our Facebook in case you've never seen it, to give you guys an idea. We usually reference it, but check it out. If your mind's eye needs an image, picture the building from season 1 of Stranger Things, because it was literally made to look like this building from the Montauk Project.
It's like a big science building.
It looks like a big warehouse almost, because it's super plain from the outside. It's got a giant antenna on the top of it, which is creepy. It's like the size of the building. And it's surrounded by a fence that says, literally, quote, area closed to the public. To this day, that's what it states.
Home of Stranger Things.
It's exactly what you would picture when you talk about something like Stranger Things if it were real. And it's not shocking that this imagery is definitely conjured straight into this work of fiction on Netflix. And they've interviewed the guys who created Stranger Things, and they're like, oh yeah, like we researched so much of that shit. So I'm going to keep going. We have a creepy private government building in the middle of nowhere away from the town. And one of those buildings that you just look at and say, oh, this thing totally has a bunch of underground floors. You know?
Yeah.
It just looks like a secret headquarters. And the place looks totally different today than it looked back in, say, 1980, which is around the time all of this kind of takes place. And
kind of like Stranger Things.
Time is a weird construct here. But yeah, it is set almost at the exact same time Stranger Things was set, which I think they kind of picked that for, like, you know, the sake that the 80s were fucking awesome. And it's a really good time to tell, like, a kid's story. But we're going to keep going here. Folks in the early 80s started to get really suspicious that the government was performing some sort of secret weapon development or bizarre experiments near their small town. And anyone who's ever lived in a small town or grew up in a small town like me, you know that every person has a different version of whatever story is being spread, because that's just how small towns work. Like, shout out to small towns, y'all talk a lot of shit. Just saying, like, and that story will change from person to person to person. And a good example of this is we stayed for a week in a small town in Ohio a few years back. And while we were there, we were told that ISIS had infiltrated the town. This is like 100% legit. Like, people there, like, believed it as fact and wanted us to know. And we're like, dude, this town is tiny. Like, what's their end game here type of thing? But that's just sort of the things that spread when people, you know, talk a lot and are kind of afraid. And that's a really good example of what happened back in Montauk in the 1980s. So let's not discount small town paranoia when it comes to this. And this would continue on throughout the 80s and gain popularity outside of the town as well. When I say popularity, it's not like everyone in the country was like, oh, did you hear about Montauk? But, like, people kind of knew about it. And then the 90s hit. Slap bracelets, the movie Clueless, Beanie Babies, basically all the best things from the 90s. And a little book came out in 1992 called The Montauk Project: Experiments in Time. Yes.
Like someone came out with a book.
Yes. And, of course, it's about time. Now, here's the super weird thing to me about this. The author of the book and the book's contents itself are what we're going to kind of dig into here. And it really just started an avalanche of shit. And the book itself is written in first person, so it almost sounds like a diary or a retelling of, like, someone's life's work. When it was released, quite a few folks put it in the science fiction category, not the conspiracy or nonfiction. But to this day, they don't claim that it's fiction. They're like, no, we want speculation. They don't, like, state outright, like, this is 100% truth, which is kind of annoying to me, because if you're going to write a book about a conspiracy theory, typically you don't want to, like, leave room for interpretation. But it's like they love the fact that people speculate on it, because it keeps it in, like, the public's eye. At least it does again now that Stranger Things came out and everyone's, you know, kind of refreshed on the fact that this is where it came from.
Yeah.
So, as a side note, you know you're in for a really fun science fiction romp when by the first chapter you've had to read the sentence, quote, further information can be found in Appendix E.
What?
It's like, E, you have 5 appendixes? The book is like 160 pages long. I was just like, 5 appendixes at least? Holy shit.
Isn't it appendices?
Probably. Who cares? It's like midnight. So, the guy who wrote this book is named Preston B. Nichols, and I shall refer to him henceforth as either Nichols or Preston B, because Preston B sounds actually kind of cool.
Okay.
So, Preston B, according to Preston B, started recovering memories of events that had taken place in Montauk that somehow had been wiped from his mind. I'm going to get to this a little bit later. I'm not going to get too deep into the whole recovered memory thing, but there's some speculation that he's full of shit on this. But it's because he's actually
theory. Of course,
he's actually telling someone else's story who was involved in the project, who was like too afraid to come forward, or he just wanted to do it for them. But like I said, we're going to get to that. The book starts off with a few things of note. It's like the foreword, you know, before they're going to tell you some stuff about like how they wrote the book and thank a bunch of people. No, in this one, it's a guide to reading the book that lets you know it is, quote, an exercise in consciousness. And the way that you're going to view time will get changed because this book is about to blow your mind.
Okay.
It's like an experiment, is kind of how they put it. It also states that some of the stuff within the book are, quote, soft facts. Facts that, like, really wanted to prove themselves, but it just doesn't happen. And they're like, I swear to God, this never happens. I'm so sorry.
Oh, my gosh.
And then there are also, quote, hard facts in the book, which are supported by documentation or physical evidence. So stuff that you can trust. And there are also gray facts, which are, quote, plausible, but not easily provable as hard fact. And as a side note, before I get to reading this book, I'm already like, you know what? Fuck you, book. That's just so annoying to me because they're not going to delineate at any point which ones are gray, soft, or hard. So
Okay.
you just know that this book is basically partially full of shit, maybe telling you some stuff that actually happened. And the book opens up with chapter 1, which I'm sure is the connection you've all been waiting for me to say if you've ever heard about this, the Philadelphia experiment, which is
You cover that,
directly
right?
connected to the Montauk Project. And yes, I did cover the Philadelphia experiment. It was on episode 40. As a quick recap, they're basically testing during the World War II era to try and teleport a ship, and they supposedly succeeded if you don't mind everyone dying or being melded into the ship itself. It likely never took place, but some kinds of experiments were being done to ships back in the day. They were saying it was to demagnetize them so that mines wouldn't stick to them and blow them up, and that's why they're using like big chains that were having an electrical current run through them.
Huh.
That's like the official story. You can listen to episode 40 if you want the deets. It's actually pretty cool. Quick side note on that, I went back home to Northwest Indiana, and I was talking to one of my uncles, and he said that when the movie The Philadelphia Experiment came out, which is very important here, when that movie came out, he saw it, and he was telling my grandfather about it. My grandfather was in World War II, and he brought up the Philadelphia Experiment and, like, the plot of the movie, and my grandfather's like, oh, yeah, I've heard of that. He's like, oh, have you? Like, did you read a review? He's like, oh, no. I heard of it during the war. Like, everyone talked about the fact that they teleported a ship. Like, it came from my grandfather's mouth, and it freaked my uncle the fuck out because it was supposedly based on a true story.
Right.
And my grandfather was like, oh, yeah, dude, like, everyone heard about that. Like, that shit happened, and they fucking buried it. And he was just like, my normally reserved grandfather speaking up on that really creeped him out. I just kind of got cold chills thinking about it. So according to Nichols, the experiment culminated with a, quote, hole being ripped through space-time, and it wound up connecting to Montauk, New York, in 1983. So they've made this portal between time, which doesn't exactly align with the stuff that we've heard about the Philadelphia experiment. So we're kind of going to move away from it, but it's still like got a lot of details in here. Now you can probably guess, but shit's about to get really, really weird. So I'm not 100% sure which of these facts are hard, soft, or gray. But here are some of the claims of experiments that took place in Montauk in this book. And future books Nichols would write, because I'm pretty sure he wrote 4 or 5 books on this subject. The first thing is that the experiment, quote-unquote, connected, so to speak, with 1943 and through the USS Eldridge, which I think is what it's called, into what is known as, quote, hyperspace, which is what you punch on the Millennium Falcon when you want to jump forward. So it became stuck in this space known as hyperspace, which apparently like exists outside of time. It's really weird. I tried to read some stuff on it and my brain got really sad, so I stopped.
Isn't that why in hyperspace you jump from one end of the universe to a completely different space?
I don't really think those things connect. I'm not sure the Star Wars universe and the Montauk Project connect, but maybe. Who the hell knows? What wound up happening basically is the ship got stuck in hyperspace, and the folks in the 1983 spot were like, oh, it's cool, like, we got this. And they went into hyperspace, got on the ship, deactivated the generators that were running the experiment, and then it went back to 1943. So picture that fun stuff in your mind's eye. And if you're having trouble, just imagine that this ship got teleported into the Upside Down, hung out there until someone fixed it, and then it went back to its normal space and time. While that was happening, 2 men named Al Bielek, I think I'm saying his name right, Bielek, and Duncan Cameron claimed that they were on board the ship when the experiment was triggered in 1943, and when shit got real fucked up, like when they were in hyperspace, they jumped off the deck. Like, what else are we going to do? And they landed in 1983. These 2 guys exist, and they claim to be time travelers from 1943.
How do they know? I mean, how would you know if they're serious or if they're actually telling the truth or not?
You don't. You just, I mean, that's
they don't
why
have identification, or
they do have identification, and that's the thing is they kind of make up a lot of shit to explain why they have identification, and we're gonna get into it a little bit. So they claim that they were like taken for testing and met this famous scientist that had actually died 26 years beforehand, who's really dead. So maybe not being 100% truthful about this. As a side note, that guy's name was John von Neumann. He supposedly worked on this little experiment back in 1943 called the Philadelphia experiment. And they acted like he was there in 1983 when they landed. And, of course, this is one of the things that the government officially denied, is that this scientist that definitely did exist did not work on whatever the Philadelphia experiment project was. It's one of the only things in this entire story where they came forward like, no, that's not true. That's official. Stamped it. And the rest of it they just kind of ignore. Because it's like people running wild and they don't want to say anything at all. But when it came to this guy, they're like, nope, lies.
Doesn't that make you think that maybe
They're
it's
lying?
true? Yeah.
It's bizarre. So that's like the first thing this book claims happens when it gets into chapter 1. And we'll get into some stuff on the time travelers later. But other claims within the book include that this rip was somehow changed into a, quote, time tunnel, and folks were sent through and traveled backwards and forwards in time, checking out all the shit but never changing anything. I saw reports that someone went as far back as 100,000 BC to collect light and dark matter, which is just bizarre.
Yeah.
They went forward to like the 26th century. They visited the American Revolution and the American Civil War just to watch, which is like weird. You know what I mean? Especially when you're developing this for war, you figure the first thing that you would do is go kill Hitler, just like in, like, I don't know, every Doctor Who and Supernatural, but they don't like purposely travel back in time. Spoilers if you haven't seen whatever season that is.
Well,
where, like,
Doctor
Hitler
Who
comes back.
Doctor Who, I mean, he takes her to the end of the world, like, just to watch it. You don't remember that episode?
No, I do. That's just the sort of bizarre stuff. I don't know. Maybe the Doctor was in charge of this project, but there's a lot of crazy shit that they do with this time tunnel.
Based on a true story.
Oh my God. So at some point, while they're using this time tunnel, according to the book, obviously, contact was made with alien extraterrestrial beings, and they basically met us, and they're like, hey, you guys like are working on some cool shit. We really like that. And then they gave us some hand-me-down technology to like amp up our shit.
Wow.
An alien monster at one point traveled through the tunnel and attacked the Montauk Project base, where researchers were, quote, devoured. Equipment was completely fucked with, and the tunnel had to be shut down. The creature was eventually destroyed. Sounds like a demigorgon.
Quote unquote destroyed.
The building itself had 12 levels of basement where all this shit went down. Get it? Went down, basement. Homeless people were abducted and experimented on with time travel missions where they were basically sent to observe because they were expendable, and electromagnetic radiation resistance where they were just like putting them in a room or in scenarios where they would have these horrible radiation waves put onto them to see what would happen. The government apparently also tested the psychic abilities of individuals under their employ, the homeless, and the folks from the nearby town, and of course, kids they abducted.
Wow. Abducted.
Yes, which is, of course, 11 from Stranger Things.
Did they use sensory deprivation?
Kind of, yeah. They have an experiment, a specific famous experiment that I'll get to. Now, I looked into missing persons cases from Montauk for the last 100 years of anything I could find documented. And aside from a vacationer who went missing in 2012 that no one ever found, and a transit officer from nearby whose body wound up being found at the lighthouse of Montauk, there isn't a lot. I mean, that was what I could really dig up. So it's definitely not the spike you'd expect to see in a town where this is taking place.
Yeah, with people getting abducted.
Unless they're not like Pennywise the Clown and they don't have that sensory deprivation field that makes people forget. So they were probably just taking them from somewhere else and bringing them here if this is like real. You know what I mean?
I could see that.
If we're being plausible about this, it makes sense to kidnap from one spot and bring them somewhere else.
Well, the thing is, too, there aren't that many people on that island, right? So if you took one person,
they'd
it's like
notice.
Right.
Exactly. And that's the thing, too. They're taking people that are children from other parts of the country, I'm just speculating, and homeless people. So it is claimed that scientists at the facility figured out how to influence the actions of the nearby town using the giant antenna on top of their building, and supposedly were working on mind control the entire time. One of the famous experiments to have supposedly taken place was in a device called the Montauk chair. And it was basically a big-ass chair that would hook you up to a various bunch of technologies and some form of sensory deprivation.
Did you put your feet in a bucket of water and then hold a cat?
No, it's not Constantine. But this would amplify your psychic abilities, so more cerebro than anything. One such subject that had this experiment performed on him was Duncan Cameron, which is one of the dudes who jumped through the portal.
Right.
So, Here's the thing. We're going to get even weirder now. It said that he had psychic abilities and that when those were combined with the chair, they basically became downright frightening. The experiment was called the, quote, seeing eye. And this is a quote from Nichols, okay? With a lock of a person's hair or other appropriate object in his hand, Duncan could concentrate on that person and be able to see as if he was seeing through their eyes, hearing through their ears, and feeling through their body.
That's unnatural.
He could actually see through other people anywhere on the planet. Yeah, unnatural.
Or supernatural.
Or super bullshit, but still, this is what's in the book. So if we're getting a little bit too weird for you, it's gonna get worse. And by worse, I mean better if you think this is funny. Or if you 100%...
If you think this is funny?
Or if you 100% buy into this. So, Duncan himself is a complicated person. In fact, the other guy is a complicated person, too. So stay with me here. If you get confused, just know you're not alone, because this shit is bizarre, and it about cracked my egg when I was trying to put this shit together. So, the two guys who jumped off the USS Eldridge were Duncan Cameron and Al Bielek. Okay?
Okay.
With me?
Yep.
Two guys, Duncan and Al. They landed on the ground. It's 1983. They went, holy shit, it's 1983. They probably picked a piece of grass, held it up to the wind, and that told them it was 1983. And scientists were like, yup, let's take some tests. Now get back through the portal. And they got chucked back to 1943. They were given a mission when they got sent back through. The mission was very simple. Destroy the shit on the USS Eldridge. So whatever technology that they had been using to perform the experiment, their mission was to go break it so it wouldn't do anything anymore, which Al Bielek said they carried out successfully. Now, at some point, hold on to your hats, Al would be, quote, de-aged to what appears to be a child's age. His memory was then wiped, and he was given a false identity, so he could live out his life as a normal person.
So you're saying he's 5 from Umbrella Academy?
Yeah. What was that fake name, you ask? That fake name was Al Bielek, because Al Bielek doesn't exist. He was actually Edward Cameron, Duncan Cameron's brother.
What?
The entire time. Now, naturally, in 1963, 20 years after the experiment, he convinced his, or their, father to have another child so that they could move Duncan's consciousness from 1983 into it at the time of 1963, which he says they did. They called this the, quote, walk-in soul. It's like turnkey ready body, just move on in.
What?
And this is why I really hate conspiracies. Anyways, that Duncan, the one that they had like the soul transferred into, he was the one with psychic power. So if you're confused,
the one.
That's just what happens. And Duncan Cameron is a person who actually did live, and in fact, he just died on May 9th, 2019.
What?
These guys, by the way, are all dead. Most of them died early 2000s. Like, one of them died 2010. This guy just died this year. And we should have covered this topic sooner. Maybe he would have come on. He probably knew we were waiting. So, as a side note, he basically, during the experiment, according to this, went batshit crazy. He had an episode of severe psychosis, and he was, I think, in the chair at the time. And if not, then I guess his abilities have been heightened because he accidentally summoned Junior, the name of a large Bigfoot-esque creature that fucked that place up good. That is the monster I referred to earlier. He was the kid that pulled it through.
Wow.
According to all this, Duncan Cameron was supposedly a part of multiple government projects, not just this one, including Project Pegasus, MK Ultra, which this is technically a part of, the Silva mind control, which apparently was the guy that, I guess this guy had this mind control thing that was supposed to be an independent study, and he was working for MK Ultra the whole time.
Okay. And
apparently these are all like tied into each other, but please don't at me on this. I'm not looking for corrections. Let me discover all this shit on my own because it's really, really hard to keep straight. And anyone that's like, actually, this is how the conspiracy theory went. Have you read the conspiracy theory? Please don't correct my fucking facts. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. They didn't jump off of it and land in 1983. It was actually 1984. No, I'm pretty sure it was 1983. That said, once all this shit was done, he'd summoned the monster. They defeated the Demogorgon. They were all told, the staff, to shut the fuck up. But in most cases, they were brainwashed so they wouldn't retain any memories of it, or sent back in time in these two's cases, or just shot.
What?
According to the book, like, they just killed people they couldn't trust. So it was like, Ooh, it looks like in your quarterly review, you reported your supervisor for taking pudding cups from the fridge in the break room. And the employee was like, yup, I take the rules very, very seriously. And they're like, or can you just not keep a secret? And then you cue the gunshot noise.
Wow.
Because, like, you had to know what the hell you were doing if you worked here. So Duncan and Al/Edward, since he insists that that was who he really was, had their minds wiped, but they eventually recovered their memories and met up with the author of the book, Nichols, who was like, holy forking shirt balls, and wrote about their experiences in his book. So, how's your brain? Because mine hurts. Clearly proof that this thing is real and someone's affecting us right now.
Okay.
Because it's complicated stuff. So, they shut it down, right? And according to some folks, that is all a lie. It never got shut down. They're still doing experiments there, which in my opinion will be downright silly because it kind of looks like shit now. And if you have all this attention, why would you stay at the same base? You know what I mean? Not trying to think like an evil genius. I know I've been talking about the best ways to kidnap kids and perform experiments on them.
Oh my gosh.
But I'm just saying, like, these things don't add up, and this is the only way it would make sense to me. And this wasn't the only stuff that Nichols and co. would claim the Montauk Project was responsible for. So in later books, there was more that came out. And here's a fun recap of some of the things that supposedly happened or were developed in Montauk, okay? First of all, which I find fascinating, the chief director of operations at this base was a man named Nikola Tesla, whose death was faked in a completely other conspiracy theory that they tied into this one.
Okay.
The site was responsible for the development of black helicopters, the super quiet, stealthy ones that they used to get around, which exist. What? So I'm like, okay, cool. Maybe that's true.
Helicopters?
You know? Yeah. The stealth black helicopters, you've never heard of them?
No.
Of course you haven't. They're stealthy. So they also developed flying saucers here, but sent those to other bases for testing. And as a side note, how? If they weren't tested, they clearly couldn't fly, so they just shipped them on the back of a semi. Like, I need to know the details of that. They, of course, filmed the moon landing hoax here. And despite these experiments where they make contact with extraterrestrials who give us all this technology and they can time travel, they still apparently said, fuck the moon, and decided not to go and just had a camera crew show up. They had a team of scientists creating creatures in a lab, like every scene in a creepy movie or TV show you've ever seen where they're doing like genetic experiments. And they, of course, managed to make something successfully that would become known as my main man, JD, the Jersey Devil, from episode 18 of Scary-ish. Side note, this one really pissed me off because they must have had to adjust that whole time portal thing and just chuck JD into it, their prized possession, so he'd pop out at 1909 when he had his big week, like decades before all this supposedly took place.
Wow.
And last but not least, not really last, but let's be real, like this is where the list is going to end. The Men in Black were, of course, founded here. This is where they were created and apparently had their home base.
I could believe that, though, because Men in Black is like, you know, creepy.
It's a great movie. I agree. Please don't listen. I don't want to get flashy thinged. So, there's one more I forgot. To top it all off, this is where AIDS was invented and created. So they perpetrated that whole AIDS thing according.
Someone said that?
It's in the book. It's in one of their books. Yeah. So now you might be saying, Adam, I heard that, and then in parentheses, insert something insane here, was part of the Montauk Project also. You're probably right. I've looked through upwards of 5 books just tonight, about the Montauk Project, and depending on which ones you are reading and who wrote them, this place connects to basically every conspiracy theory you could ever think of, and probably some stuff you've never even heard of. So herein lies my personal problem when it comes to conspiracy theories. They always start off rooted in some sense of reality, which will feel fairly real, you know? And so very quickly, they go from 0 to 100 and they do not slow down.
It's like Paul McCartney being dead.
Yeah, it's like, that's like Mandela effect stuff where it's like misinformation spread throughout people. But like, it's like if you connected all of them, you know what I mean? Like Paul McCartney is dead because it's Sex in the City, not Sex and the City. And I can't wrap my head around how everyone starts out rooted in reality and then starts connecting dots that seemingly don't exist, let alone connect. Like, if the people telling these stories sound like they're short-circuiting sometimes, like they're just tossing in stuff, I think that's the natural state. It's like they're connecting everything they've heard of, and it's it becomes less plausible, so the circumstances become more and more bizarre, you know? Like, well, yeah, I get that I'm young and the timeline doesn't match up, but I was de-aged, you know? And they don't really get into many details like that. And it's very frustrating. So, like, it would be if you heard someone say, so the government has a private property facility here where they're doing hidden stuff from the public eye, like experiments around weird, plausible phenomenon, plus kidnappings. And time travel. Oh, God, it's happening. Aliens, teleporting, Jersey Devil, AIDS.
It's not even just kidnapping at that point. It's like human trafficking a little bit.
Yeah. And it gets just so bizarre. So, do you know why this bothers me so very much? It's not because someone trying to enlighten me annoys me, because if it's something that they believe is the truth and they're trying to fill me in, it's like, oh, thanks, dude. Like, good looking out. Way to keep me woke as fuck. I appreciate that.
Wow.
It bothers me because if I had a big secret base and was doing top secret things with possibly illegal means to justify something that was probably really, really bad results.
Right.
I would make sure that things people were talking about when rumors started to fly around were the most crazy, bizarre, batshit ideas ever.
Which is what's going on.
Which is what always seems to happen. Like, that way if the truth does come out, it just, like, floats away with the rest of the garbage. Like the Millennium Falcon escaping in Empire Strikes Back.
Wow.
And all I'm saying is don't be a stormtrooper here, people. Be Boba Fett, okay? There's a nugget of truth in this trash pile somewhere, and it could be worth 224,190 credits, which is the highest Jabba the Hutt would set the bounty on Han Solo's head. Which, yes, I did have to look up for 20 fucking minutes because I knew it was a really high number.
Oh my gosh.
Be a Boba Fett. All right. Would it at all shock me to find out that the government had tested possible psychic abilities and technology for controlling people's minds? Absolutely friggin' not, especially not during the height of the Cold War, especially since this all took place during the Cold War, you know?
Yeah.
It's like if this all took place like from the end of World War II till just about the end of the Cold War, they had so many experiments being run, and they were developing so many weapons and technologies and researching everything. That shit's real declassified stuff. And FYI, some of the fuckers that were supposedly in charge of this place were from Operation Paperclip, which was very, very real. And since you'll probably ask me here, at least you're asking me with your eyes. I thought
we've already watched a movie about Operation Paperclip.
What would it be then?
Or what, did I watch a documentary? I've already watched some type of film / documentary about it, but go on.
Okay, cool. Thank you for letting everyone know that you know what it is. But it was a secret program that totally existed 100%. You can find the documents written back in the 40s about this. They brought over 1,600 German scientists after World War II to give us an advantage during the Cold War. And their temporary stay lasted 15 years, from like 1945 to like 1959. And afterward, they really weren't accounted for. They kind of just got absorbed into stuff, you know? And some of the fuckers who were in this program,
like the atomic bomb and
they worked on
like
a bunch of stuff. But some of these guys were actual, like, not just members, but leaders of the Nazi party that they brought over. Like, that is confirmed shit. And there's reports that the people who worked here, like, not even attached to any of these crazy experiments, but like the reason this place is off limits is because it's a secret government lab where they have people working here, and it is very highly plausible that some of these dudes were there. And if they were there, they were probably in charge. But hey, if you say Nikola Tesla was in charge and that he faked his own death and tie in conspiracy theories, it's suddenly not as sexy to talk about them. It's more fun to talk about him, you know? So what do I think? I think that this place was definitely real. It totally existed, you know? And it was a military base, and experiments were conducted there. But do I think the details from the book are real? Not so much. And I think this book really gets tied up with what everyone thinks about the Montauk Project. Especially when the foreword in the book, if it were 100% real to me, would say something like, this happened 100%. But instead it's just like, here's your guide for the experience your mind's about to have. It's different, you know? And Nichols was the driving force, but a guy named Peter Moon also worked on it, and neither of them to this day have ever made a hard, fast statement that this is a 100% legit thing. And like I said earlier, they encourage speculation, and they refuse to call the book fiction, but who knows? Like, maybe it's all true. You figured that you would say it's all true if it were, you know? Maybe some of it's true, or maybe none of it is true. But anytime there's a story, they say the truth lies somewhere in the middle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think the thing that sucks about conspiracy theories is that the story, if you're looking at it on a scale of like 1 to 10, and the truth is supposed to be 5, when the conspiracy theories get outlandish, 1 to 10 all of a sudden means that like the truth starts lying towards 2, you know?
Yeah.
And so everything else from 2 to 10 just seems so like outlandish that you just stop caring about some portions of it. And all I'm saying is that if I were to do this, that's the exact tactic I would take to make sure disinformation discredited anything that ever got out. And for a place that is real, that real people worked at, there is shockingly little to be learned about what was actually done there for however many years it existed, and if anyone has ever come forward to talk about the fact that they worked there. You know what it honestly reminds me of? Like, we live in Nevada. I've met maybe 2 people since I've moved here who know someone who work at Area 51. And anytime something happens in Area 51, like, it's a big fucking deal. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I work with a guy who said that, like, agents like Men in Black came to his door and started asking him a million questions about his neighbor and how he's been acting lately and things that he said and has he kept weird hours. And then like a week later, the guy came home and he's like, hey, like, I don't want to be intrusive, but I had some Men in Black looking motherfuckers at my door asking me a million questions about you. Like, are you a spy? Like, what's going on? He told him like, hey, like, what I can tell you is I work for Area 51. And something happened where they had to investigate everyone to see if they were the cause. And I apologize. I didn't mean for your family to be involved. You're just the only neighbor that I talked to. And I know one other person who used to be married to someone who works at Area 51. And it's so far away from where we live, you know?
Uh-huh.
And they take all these different, like, precautions to get people transported there and to stay for certain amounts of time. And it's bizarre stuff. And all I ever hear about what happens there is, yeah, they work at Area 51. Because that's all they'll ever talk about.
Yeah, a lot of my, well, not a lot, a couple of my coworkers have worked there. My coworkers' friends have worked there or still work there. But it's just, that's all they ever say is like, yeah, I worked on stuff.
That's all they're ever going to get from them, you know?
Yeah.
And like the only thing you hear about this place is the conspiracy theories. You don't hear anything else. And that always makes me really, really, really suspicious because it is just the best way to keep everyone's mouth shut. And then the only information that's out there is disinformation. So you'll never find out what they're actually up to, you know? And that's super creepy to me. Yeah. So, like I said, look for that nugget of truth because I guarantee you there's at least one piece out there for most of these things. So that, my spooky friends, is the Montauk Project.
Cool. Gouda.
Thank you. I was like going through some crazy shit. Like I hit some websites where I was like, no, I don't want this on my browser history. Like go away right now. Because it's like I read something about like the time travel theory that one guy used who was actually like the consciousness transported into someone's younger body. And it was like a site dedicated to him. That's where I found out he died on May 9th. And I was just like, oh, wow, like they're going balls deep in some bizarre shit right now. It hurts my brain to read. So like the further you fall down the rabbit hole, the crazier it gets, not the more rational, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, it was already crazy to start off with at stage 1. So I really, really wonder on this one. Not enough where I want Men in Black to be knocking on my front door. So if that ever comes out, I'll be super happy to hear about it. But I think I'm done with my digging for this one.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. Speaking of sexy experiments, I am going to talk to you folks about Jeffrey Dahmer.
He was a sexy experiment?
No, but he did perform some so sexy experiments.
It just hit me. Oh, this is going to be gross.
Okay. So for any of you that are into true crime, you probably know all about this guy. He's a pretty big name in the murder world. And even if you haven't spent a lot of time in the true crime world, you've probably seen trailers for movies and TV shows that are all about him. There are so many books written about him. This guy was a creep. He was a weirdo. Dang it. Get out of here.
What the hell are you doing here?
He was a straight up monster and a serial killer. And he definitely goes under the category of scary and not scary-ish. He's just awful. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born May 21st, 1960. And
he's not a Taurus. He just made it into that Gemini.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, Gemini makes so much sense. It makes so much sense. Okay. No offense to any Geminis. I think
all the Geminis listening are like, hey,
No,
fuck
no, no.
you. I will kill you and eat you.
my no, my sister is also a Gemini. So anyway,
She's listening like, I will fucking kill you and eat you.
so he's the eldest of Joyce Annette and Lionel Herbert Dahmer's 2 sons. And his father was a student at Marquette University going for a chemistry degree, and his mother was a teletype machine instructor. And it seems like they had a pretty average American life, considering they weren't overly rich, they weren't super duper poor, they were just, what are those people called?
Middle class?
Yeah, they're just middle class people.
I like how you couldn't figure out middle class, because now it's like, just so everyone knows, we're not rich. Like, that's not the reason she couldn't remember middle class. We're on the other end of that, folks.
That being said, it's claimed that Dahmer didn't live the life of a coddled, happy child. Some say that he did, some say that he didn't, but what's definitely known for sure is that his mother was known to be the one that was super greedy for all the attention and all the pity. So neighbors claim that she was a really intense, like super tense person, who was one to just start arguments. So she'd start arguments with her husband and with her neighbors. She was known to spend a lot of time in bed, quote, recovering from weaknesses, end quote, demanding constant attention from her husband, working herself into a tizzy over it. She's just always wanting people to pay attention to her. And I think that definitely cuts into the baby time. He's just a little kid and he's not getting any attention, you know what I mean?
He's being neglected. And that's kind of where this apparently begins.
So she even attempted suicide by overdose on anti-anxiety medication at one point. I can see it being a really difficult situation for everyone involved. I'm sure the dad's stressed out. I'm sure the kids are stressed out. Jeffrey's dad would be away studying at school or something like that, and his mom was just an anxious mess at home. And it leaves the kids in kind of an odd spot dealing with, you know? Apparently, before the age of 4, Dahmer was known to be energetic and happy. He was just like any other kid. Then he had a double hernia surgery that seemed to leave him in a more subdued state. He was just not as energetic, not as running around crazy kid status.
You had a double hernia as a kid?
I guess so.
Wow.
Yeah, he had a double hernia surgery. I can't imagine my niece being quiet and introverted and
I would think she was plotting something.
Oh yeah. That girl is the make-believe queen, both because she's always a queen in the make-believe world, but also because she's the best at it.
She has a wonderful imagination. I can't imagine a child that has such a wonderful imagination, like going through something like a surgery like that and being stuck and stationary and then also being neglected. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, okay, keep going.
So Dahmer himself described his early childhood as one full of tension and his parents constantly arguing with each other, which is super duper sad. Elementary school had him sticking out as the quiet and shy kid. His first grade teacher noted that he seemed like he felt neglected. And she even noted that it may stem from his mother's illnesses. And I'm not sure if that's a normal thing for teachers to be making notes on or not. It just seems weird writing a note on his report card. Like, I blame the mother for his introverted tendencies. Who does that?
Also, gotta check plus in spelling.
Right. Despite his shy demeanor, he still had a small group of friends, which I totally believe because I was that awkward shy kid in school and I'm still that awkward shy kid. Like the other day, I didn't know if I should shake someone's hand. And so she looked at me and I looked at her and we were both thinking, what should we do? Because the moment had passed and it's weird now. And then Adam shakes her hand and I feel even more stupid.
You could have just shaken her hand after I shook her hand. Like, I was like the gateway handshake and you could have just come right through.
It was just really awkward. The moment was over. But I was still able to make a small group of friends when I was a kid, even though I was super duper awkward. And I think these little groups of kids, it's just everyone has their own unique quirks. And I think they appreciate their own weirdnesses with each other, you know?
And I hope so.
That was my group of friends. We're all weird in our own way. A pretty early sign/red flag that someone should have paid more attention to was Dahmer's early interest in dead animals. And I'm not saying that everyone who's interested in dead animals becomes a serial killer. I'm just referring to Dahmer in this case because he was super interested in their dead bodies. And supposedly his interest began at the age of 4. So at the age of 4, I don't think I was like, oh, a fly. I don't even want to touch that. That's gross.
I was like, don't tell me Flintstones gummies can only be had once a day. This thing tastes way too good.
Yeah, so his interest with the dead bodies started around the age of 4, which is about the time that he had that double hernia surgery. And I don't know if it's because when they put him under or something, he dreamt some weird stuff about how they were fixing his hernia.
Maybe he had to face the idea that he was about to be cut into.
Yeah,
you know,
or something like that.
At a 4-year-old
you're right.
age.
It's just so interesting. But he recalled having watched his father remove animal bones from beneath their home at some point as a kid. And he began his little obsession by collecting large insects in jars. And then that elevated to the collection of roadkill that he would then dismember, and occasionally accompanied by a couple of his friends. They'd go back to their house. They'd take them apart. It was just really weird.
I understand collecting stuff, but when you start getting to dead things you're collecting, like roadkill.
Well, and then he'd put them in jars in the tool shed.
When you get to the dismemberment part, you should probably be having that conversation like, hey, I think something's off about Jeffrey.
Yeah, apparently he was curious about how they quote-unquote fit together. And he did horrific things to these animal carcasses. And Dahmer's father stated that Jeffrey was quote-unquote oddly thrilled by the sounds that the bones made and was just fixated with playing with them. It's, how do you not look at your kid like, that's a little weird. Other kids aren't playing with bones.
Maybe redirect him to a different hobby.
Like Legos.
These make really fun sounds when you pull them apart.
Yeah. But it's just like, read a book or try to become a vet or try to become a taxidermist.
Right.
You know what I mean? At least then you would get your hands on dead animal carcasses, understandably. It's just different. There are so many other options. And it's just such an odd thing to go from roadkill to spoilers. Murder. So at the age of 6, in October of 1966, the Dahmer clan headed on over to Doylestown, Ohio. So they moved to Ohio. Joyce gave birth to their second son on December 18th, 1966, and Jeffrey got the honor of naming him. And he chose the name David, which is cute. And it's like how your brother got to name you He-Man. It was kind of cute.
Yep, same thing.
Lionel Dahmer, even my sister's kid, Ryan, she got to name her sister too.
Yeah, she named her.
Yeah. Lionel Dahmer also got his chemistry degree that same year and got a job as a chemist in Akron, Ohio. So this is a pretty big year for the family. Lots of things are going right. They just had a kid. They moved. He got his degree, got a good job. In 1968, they then moved to Bath, Ohio. And then 2 years after that, at the age of 10, over a chicken dinner, Dahmer asks his father what would happen to the chicken bones if they were placed in a bleach solution. And
he didn't say bleach solution at 10, did he? Oh my God.
That's what the internet told me. So Lionel mistook this morbid curiosity for scientific curiosity, which is totally understandable. He's a scientist. He's like, oh my gosh, my kid is interested.
Trying to redirect it, but at the same time kind of lying to himself about it.
He was just so excited to see this introvert of a kid actually come and talk to him about something. So he got really excited that his son was taking interest in anything. And so, like any dad wanting to have a close relationship with their child, he demonstrated the safe bleaching and preservation of animal bones. So he taught him how to do it. And Dahmer would then use this knowledge to build his own collection of preserved animal bones. It's unfortunate that his dad just wanted to believe his son was following in his footsteps because he really just wanted him to, I don't know, be a scientist like he is.
And the fact that he knew this process and was able to teach it to him, like, as morbid as it does seem, like, some people, like, I mean, I understand I'm into some weird stuff, you know? I'm not saying I'm into bleaching animal bones to preserve them, but, like, it would be cool if you made a connection, even if it wasn't exactly what you're into, with your kid who's been so introverted and odd. Like, I'll show him how to do this. And he takes an interest and he actually shows that he knows how to do it at a very young age. You're just hoping that's going to be like, he's going to be, I don't know, a skeleton salesman. Who the fuck knows? I don't know what you could do with that hobby. What I'm saying is that he probably was hoping it would turn into something good.
Well, see, that's why I'm like, become a taxidermist. You get to do all these things. You get to pose them. You do all the leathering, all that stuff, right?
I don't know. I'm taking your word for it.
I have no idea either. I don't know any taxidermists. Please, if there are any out there, let us know how it works because I am totally interested. Anyway, so Teen Dahmer was just an extension of his adolescent persona. He was still this shy, introverted kid. He was an outcast with only a few friends. One of my coworkers makes a good point, though. Like, when it comes to your friends, you want quality over quantity. So maybe he had really good friends, or not. He had a couple of them, though.
Oh, I thought you meant how they taste.
Different Dahmer joke. Anyway, okay, so Dahmer's classmates later realized how odd his actions were in retrospect. He would smuggle beer and hard liquor into school and hide them in his locker.
This is the only thing I know about Jeffrey Dahmer is he used to get blitzed at school.
He'd drink constantly throughout the day. He was only 14. 14. You're just killing your brain cells. They're barely there. You're just a little kid.
I don't understand how, at this point, and maybe it's just because I'm from a fucked up place, he wasn't like the coolest guy in school, coming to school with booze in his locker and just getting shit-faced every day.
I didn't even drink until I was well into 20 years old. Plus, the only reason I did was because my boyfriend at the time was like 6 years older than me and didn't realize how young I was, which makes me think I must have looked really old or something. Because everybody wants to look younger.
You look like you're 10, dude.
No, not now. Now I look like I'm 29.
You look like you're 10.
No, that's not what the chick at Disney said.
Hey, I didn't get carded when I was like, I don't know. Hang on, let me do some quick math. I was like 10 years old and I didn't get carded. So
what?
We were on a cruise in the Bahamas. This is 100% true. Ask Spooky Mom about this.
Shut the front door.
And they had 2 drinks. They had lemonade for kids and they had fucking, I can't remember what the name of this drink
Mike's
is.
Hard Lemonade?
No, it was like fruit punch is what I thought it
White Claw?
was. So yeah, they had a bunch of fucking White Claw. And I walked up and they let me walk up to this thing that's like clearly an alcoholic beverage. I want to say Maui Wowie, but that's fucking weed. It's a Bahama Mama. That's what it was. And I filled my cup with Bahama Mama, and I went back and I ate food. And we're on this cruise, and everyone's super happy, and I drank it, and I'm like, this fruit punch tastes like shit. And then I went back up and got more, and I came and sat down, and my mom's like, what are you drinking? I was like, fruit punch. It doesn't taste good. She's like,
aww,
you're drinking a Bahama Mama, and she took it from me. So I don't want to hear your I didn't get carded stories.
Okay, anyway, so Dahmer was 14, drinking during and after school. He's just getting fucked up. My little teenage brain was still like, OMG Otter Pops. Popsicles are the best. So this is just so weird to me that this guy was drinking at 14. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Don't shame drinking. I drank at 14. My brother was a senior. I was a freshman. When he graduated, I got to go to the open houses as a DD because I had my permit. And then, they'd let me drink every now and then. Fuck you, explain so much. You talking bad about my bleached bone collection?
Oh, ew. Okay, so, oh my gosh, if you had a bleached bone collection, I'd be kind of freaked out.
You clearly have never been in our crawl space.
Stop scaring me. Okay. Anyway, so one of Dahmer's classmates once asked him why he was drinking gin in class, to which he replied, "It's my medicine," which is so sad because the fact that he felt like he needed to be smashed to get through his day, he was fighting some demons, dude, or he knew there was something wrong with him.
And people probably took that as a joke. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
It's just a funny thing.
Because you're a
weird
kid and people
said.
don't. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And people don't take it seriously because he's a kid.
Like to keep the demons at bay. Like, no, he was being legit. Like, that's exactly what he was doing.
Despite his drinking habits and introverted tendencies, school staff say that he was polite and was known to be highly intelligent. He even played in the high school band at some point, obviously not for very long, but he did. Although he seemed to be quite the outsider in school, he was still known to be the class clown. And I assume it's because he was always drinking. Always. He was always drunk. He would play pranks on his classmates for their amusement, but also for the attention. They started calling these, quote unquote, doing a Dahmer, which is
wow.
I mean, you got to be on some level for the whole school to say that.
So he kind of was like the fucking cool kid in school. He's just also the weird kid at the same time.
Yeah. And they would include things like making goat sounds, acting like they're having a seizure, or like they have cerebral palsy. They were acting like horrible assholes, and this would be their quote unquote pranks. It just doesn't make sense to me. And they would do all these things, and they'd knock stuff over in school, and when they went to the convenience store or whatever, they would just do these pranks and just do whatever they wanted.
Again, I'm not trying to defend Jeffrey Dahmer at all, and I feel like I'm just defending myself at this point, but I have myself, just for funsies with my friends, pretended to have seizures in multiple places.
My gosh. Oh my gosh. Why? I can't believe I know you. Okay. Anyway, I am not a psychologist, obviously, but it really does seem...
Clearly, because you're still hanging out with me.
Yeah. So it really does seem like these types of actions from Dahmer specifically seem like they stem from the fact that he wasn't given enough attention as a kid, and he desperately wanted it. So he was...
I feel like I should have my feet up and be on a couch right now, because it's kind of therapy for me.
So he was just doing all this stuff to get attention from his classmates. And it's really, to me, it's really sad, because he was just... It's like this kid that's screaming for help, but no one really knows that he needs the help.
But what kind of help did he actually need?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, is there something that someone could have said or done at any point that would have put him down a different path?
Who knows?
Probably not, man. Like, I bet you there was times where he felt like he could go down a different path, like had a really good day. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it's just like, it's a bizarre thing to think about, like how this darkness just kept pulling him back to it.
So supposedly, this is around the time that Dahmer was beginning to discover his sexuality. He was going through puberty, but was having to hide his sexual preferences. And so his homosexuality was something that I don't think he should have had to hide, but probably because of where he's from or the time that he's in, he didn't want to tell anyone, or he couldn't tell anyone.
Not to mention he's always felt like an outcast.
What was later admitted by Dahmer, however, was that he fantasized about more deviant behavior. He wanted to dominate and completely control a submissive partner, which later ends up becoming intertwined with his love of dissection and dismemberment, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, he had fucked up thoughts.
There's a 50 Shades of Grey joke in there, but I'm just going to steer away from it.
No. No.
Does Dahmer have a red room?
Shut up. Ew. Ugh. Anyway, so at 16, he even went through the steps of planning an attack on an unknowing jogger. So, lucky for said jogger, he never showed up that day that Dahmer had planned out that he was going to attack him from the bushes and stuff like that. And according to Dahmer, this was his first attempt at attacking anyone, which I think you can see in that new movie that came out, My Friend Dahmer. It like shows all the steps up until his first murder.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, so by the age of 17, Dahmer's grades were circling the drain. He wasn't doing so hot, and he was all about the booze and not about the human interactions. And his parents even got him a tutor to try and help him, but they had no success. It just wasn't working because that's not what he was focused on, you know? Then his parents got a divorce, and his dad moved out in early 1978. So it's just a lot of life to live in 18 years. That's a lot of stuff to happen.
And not to sound like too much of an asshole, but it's like typically, and I mean this is just because I've listened to a lot of stuff about serial killers, when you hear about like serious childhood trauma with like being attacked or sexually assaulted or things like that, and I'm kind of shocked that that's not part of his backstory. It's more like broken home and neglect.
Yeah, it seems like his mom just was stealing all the limelight, you know, and he has a little brother, so then the little brother's getting attention.
I can't imagine, like, I know there's people out there who are selfish and who take the attention away from their kids. I don't think any of them would ever fathom that what their behavior could cause is to create someone like Jeffrey Dahmer.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's where, like, the nature
First
thing,
nurture.
Yeah, comes into play. And I'm not going to talk about that because it's so controversial and everybody's different. Anyway, I'm just telling you about this one dude. Okay, so Dahmer graduated high school in May of 1978. Apparently, weeks before his graduation, a teacher witnessed him drinking a bunch of beer in the school's parking lot. And said teacher threatened to report him, but Dahmer's response was that he was experienced, quote, a lot of problems, end quote, at home. And that his guidance counselor was aware of all his issues. And I would still have said something to someone after the interaction, but maybe he would have attempted to kill me for it. Who knows?
Yeah, you might have wanted to be in the first person
right?
after.
I don't know. It's just hard when kids are so obviously struggling with things like this, because even though it might not be as intense of some things that other people have dealt with, it's like people deal with them all differently.
Yeah. Like, everyone's life is their own. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like you can check your privilege when it comes to a lot of stuff. And it's like, just because you haven't been through the same horrible thing doesn't mean you're not being as affected as they are from what you've gone through. And it's so fucking annoying when you meet people that are like, I call them tragedy queens, where it's like, I am royalty of the sad things that happen to people. You can't talk to someone when anytime you try and tell them, like, man, I'm really tired, or I'm really stressed, or I had a really hard day. And they're like, you don't get to have a really hard day. You know why? Because I had a really hard day. My day was harder than yours. My day was sadder than yours. Like, that shit drives me fucking insane. So many people do that, and you belittle and minimize what someone's going through. And all that does is make it so that they're not going to talk to you or probably anyone else about it, because they just don't feel like anyone cares. You know?
So Joyce, his mom, won custody over his younger son when they got divorced, and moved in with family members. But Dahmer by then was 18, so he was free to do whatever he pleased. He lived alone in their family home. His father lived in a motel nearby, and his mother moved to Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin with his brother David. And here comes the murder. So if you're squeamish, you guys skip on through. I'll try to keep the gory details to a minimum, because there are a lot. Because this is Jeffrey Dahmer we're talking about. It's going to happen. Dahmer committed his first murder at the age of 18, the summer of 1978.
Dahmer killed someone 2 years before you had your first drink?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was like looking at the year. I was like, no, but my first drink was like just...
Oh, you were looking at the actual year?
Yeah. So he was straight out of high school, newly freed from any type of parental supervision. It was literally 3 weeks after his graduation. So 3 weeks after his graduation, this kid was just a baby. And yes, I mean, legally he was an adult, but me at 18, I was a mess. And I mean, with the actions that he pulls off, it's obviously he's a mess too, but it's just, I can't imagine killing someone at 18. That's just crazy.
Just at 18, though.
Nah.
The other age is the older you get, you're like, murder is way more plausible now.
It's just... oh my goodness, it's rough to think about, period, murdering anyone, just at all. On June 18th, 1978, Dahmer picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Mark Hicks, who was on his way to a rock concert. And Hicks was a baby himself. He was only 18. He was a few weeks shy of his 19th birthday. He lured Hicks back to his place on the pretense that they would just be two bros drinking. And so, according to Dahmer, they drank for several hours just listening to music, when Hicks, quote, wanted to leave and I didn't want him to, end quote. So he beat him to death with a 10-pound dumbbell.
Holy
and
shit.
He went the coward's way about it too. He hit him from behind while Hicks was sitting in a chair. And so this guy fell unconscious, and Dahmer proceeded to strangle him. And then, fapped. It was gross. I was just like...
For those of you who don't know...
It's
fapped
gross.
Means masturbated.
It was disgusting. Okay, so...
were you there?
Just reading it, I was like, ew, who does that? But he was able to fulfill his fantasy of complete sexual control over someone.
Now, I'm not trying to defend... No, I'm kidding. I don't have a story that relates to this.
Oh, gross. So the next day, he dissected the body, buried it in the backyard.
Oh, my God.
Then several weeks later, he exhumed it, dissolved the flesh with acid, and then flushed said acid down the toilet, and then crushed the bones, scattering them behind his house. Like a messed up bro. This was just the first of 17 murders that he committed. Okay, this guy was a monster. Dahmer's father and his girlfriend returned to their family home 6 weeks later, and they discovered that Jeffrey was living alone. So I guess his mom just bounced, didn't tell the dad, like, hey, we're leaving with the other kid. fuck you, we're leaving Jeffrey. It's just so messed up.
Do you think they knew something was really wrong and they were all just like, we need to get away from Jeffrey?
Well, no, because the dad comes back. The dad comes back with his girlfriend and tries to help him. So Dahmer enrolls in Ohio State University, where he ended up failing all his classes except for one. In the only semester that I took there, he got a B- in riflery. That's the one class that he passed.
Riflery, wow.
Yeah, I didn't know colleges even offered a class like that. It doesn't seem,
I graduated a while ago, but I remember there were classes for World of Warcraft when I was in school. So
what do you even do? You just play WoW all day?
I don't know. You just raid, bro.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so whenever his dad visited him at college, he found that his room was just covered in liquor bottles. This kid was just getting wasted all the time. Dahmer dropped out of school after 3 months, even though his dad paid for 2 semesters worth.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so rough. His story is so rough. So his dad wasn't like, I'm outie, you handle it yourself. He was trying to help his kid. It's just this kid has issues. In January of 1979, Dahmer enlists in the U.S. Army at the behest of his father because he seriously wanted to get his son into shape.
Yeah, and to get him structure in his life. And that outlet for murder that he so desperately needed.
Unsurprisingly, he trained as a medical specialist at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. And on July 13th, 1979, he was stationed in Baumholder, West Germany, serving as a combat medic. So he got his hands in the nitty-gritty surgery stuff that he seemed to like, dissecting things, you know what I mean? Apparently he was either average or above average in reports of his service. So he wasn't above and beyond or anything, but he wasn't he wasn't super crappy. That being said, apparently 2 soldiers reported being raped by Dahmer during his stint in the army.
Jesus Christ.
This guy. Well, one came forward in 2010 stating that he was repeatedly raped during the 17 months they were both stationed in West Germany. Like, I can't, this guy,
At least you were not murdered and eaten.
Right, that's true. Dahmer's alcoholism just never stopped, though. So he just was messed up everywhere. Doesn't matter if you're in Germany or America, he was still messed up. It affected everything that he did. So in March of 1981, Dahmer was deemed unsuitable for military service and discharged from the army. He did receive an honorable discharge, though, as fucked up as that is. I guess his problems during his time in the military weren't thought to transfer to civilian life, so they're like, yeah, he's fine.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I've known multiple folks who have had mental issues who were discharged from the army because of them, who received honorable discharges or medical discharges where they say you're unfit and they don't exactly spell out the fact that you're unfit because there's something wrong with you, like mentally, and they kind of let you go without giving you that like dishonorable discharge or any other way where they would affect your ability to like get on with civilian life because it just will hold you back.
But like, I see what you're saying.
In my lifetime, I'm 34 years old. I know 2, maybe 3 people who have gone through that. And it's something that I feel like when you see like, oh, but they gave him an honorable discharge. Like, basically, there's a lot of times where they're like, we don't want people to know we made a fucking mistake here. We just want to get rid of it and make sure that they're able to like move on somewhere else. So, yeah, that's something that does happen.
Okay. So when he was offered a plane ticket to anywhere in the country by the army, he couldn't face his father because he failed again, right? So he chose to go to Miami Beach, Florida, to attempt a new life on his own. So he lived in a motel nearby the job that he got, and he would spend all his money on booze. So eventually, soon after he arrived, he was kicked out for non-payment. And by September of 1981, so later that year, because he got there in March or something like that. So September of that same year, he was already calling his dad like, hey, I need to come back home, because he just couldn't live out there on his own. He moved back in with his father and stepmother by that time. So girlfriend to getting married. It's cute. So he moved back in with them only to be sent to live with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin.
And again, it's like, get away from Jeffrey.
Right. So they couldn't handle him anymore because his drunk antics, they just couldn't deal with it. But sent him in December 1981 to live with his grandmother. She was the only person he was affectionate to. So the only person that he could love and treat with any modicum of respect type thing. She was a good influence on him. He eventually was able to land a job. Unfortunately for him, he was laid off 10 months later, which is sad.
Wow.
And remained unemployed for 2 years. He just lived off his grandmother's money, whatever she gave him. So on August of 1982, Dahmer was arrested for indecent exposure at Wisconsin State Fair Park, exposing himself to a group of 25 women and children, which is so
Huge red
gross. You know what the fine was, though? It was just $50.
$50.
He had to pay $50 for showing his ding-dong to a bunch of women and children. That is not enough. That's less than a speeding ticket. That's just insane.
I just had a meal where we had nothing but ramen, and there was 4 of us, and I paid twice. I could have shown my ding-dong twice in that place.
Oh my God.
For what it cost to get that fucking food.
And it definitely wasn't the last time he was arrested for that, though. You a dirty man. I can't even. He was arrested again in August of 1986 for exposing himself in front of 2 boys, and he talked his way out of it. He claimed that he had no idea that the kids were there, so he was just put on probation and sent to counseling.
I'm like, look, I didn't know there were children there. I was just taking my dick out in public.
He was just like, I was just peeing. I didn't know there were kids there.
Still, you can't piss in public.
He wasn't pissing, though, so it doesn't really matter.
Okay, I will remember these defenses that he clearly got away with because they're bizarre to me.
So by 1985, Dahmer was working at the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, but his control fantasies were triggered when a man propositioned him in the local library. He was just sitting there in the library reading a book, and some guy came by with a note that was like, hey, I'll give you a BJ. And he didn't do it. He was like, nah, dog, I'm good. But it kind of like triggered him, you know? So he began frequenting local establishments known for their gay clientele. Dahmer stated, quote, I trained myself to see people as objects of pleasure instead of people, end quote. This guy is...
The fact that he said he trained himself means it's like he was regretting the things he knew he was going to do so that he wouldn't feel like the guilt or remorse that he knew he would feel otherwise.
Yeah, well, just wait. We'll get there. So he began drugging his victims, lacing their drinks with sleeping pills, and raping them. After around 12 instances of this, he was no longer allowed into these establishments. He resorted to using hotel rooms to continue his activities. At one point, he even attempted to dig up a body to take it home. This guy had issues. He's just, oh man. On November 20th, 1987, Dahmer was 27, and he brought home a man named Stephen Tuomi, who was 25, and he didn't bring him home. So he took him to the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee, where he rented a room. The next morning, Dahmer found that Tuomi was underneath him, dead. And Tuomi was bruised all over his chest, and Dahmer's fists and forearms were also bruised, and he had no recollection of killing him. So what he did was he transported the body back to his grandmother's house.
How? How do you do that?
In a suitcase. He fucking shoved him in a suitcase, where he dismembered the body and cut up all the meaty bits, splitting them up into all different trash bags, and then the bones he just crushed with a sledgehammer. And all this, according to Dahmer, took about 2 hours. He tried to preserve the skull, but ended up crushing it eventually too. Like it's like that obsession he had as a kid for these animals.
Right.
It's just an elevation.
He still wants to preserve something of it.
This triggered something, you know. He just began actively seeking out victims. He'd lure them back to his house, he would drug them, and then he would strangle them. This same MO was what he used on 14-year-old James Dockstader, Richard Guerrero, and Anthony Sears. They weren't all 14, but that's how young that kid was. It's just so sad. So this same MO was used, and then it was all followed by the same body disposal system. So, except for Sears, he kept his junk, his ding-dong, and his head, and preserved them in acetone and stored them in his work locker. Gross.
Like at the chocolate factory?
At the chocolate factory.
Oh my God.
There were some close calls on several victims of Dahmer's. They were assaulted but not murdered. which is so lucky for them, but still, he was such a horrible person.
This is one of those things where it's like, I just mentioned checking your privilege, like telling someone like, man, you're lucky you were only assaulted by Jeffrey Dahmer, or you were only raped by Jeffrey Dahmer. It's like, no, that's not lucky. That's horrific and awful.
It's just you could have been murdered.
Yeah, like how close were you to dying?
Right. And it's just, this guy was a monster, and he just wouldn't stop. He just kept going and going. And in September of 1988, after almost 7 years of cohabitation with his grandmother, she finally asked him to move out because he kept bringing young men home late at night, and she complained about the bad smells that were coming from the basement and the garage. What? He got a 1-bedroom apartment on North 25th Street where he continued his life of crime. He kept getting arrested for various sexual assault and other crimes, including those committed with minors. This guy was disgusting.
How was he not just put into a fucking cell to rot?
He was required to register as a sex offender because of all his different things that he got caught doing. He moved in and out of his grandmother's house over the course of a few years, eventually landing in another apartment on North 25th Street, 924 North 25th Street to be exact, and apartment 213. So this is all knowledge because this is where the rest of this shit takes place, right? He took Sears preserved bits with him. So he took the head and his junk and all that stuff. He took it to his new apartment, probably as some sick decoration of some sort. In May of 1990, Dahmer lured Raymond Smith into his apartment, and he lured all these people into his apartment with the offer of $50 just to take like nude pictures of them, with the opportunity to like have sex or something, you know, for extra money or whatnot. But that's how he lured so many of these people. He was just like, $50, let me just take nude pics of you. And they'd be like, all right, whatever. So he lured this guy into his apartment where he was drugged and strangled. Dahmer went out of his way to go and buy a Polaroid camera just to take pictures of him. Like, this guy is sick. And then continued on to the dismemberment. He kept the skull, spray painted it, putting it on display next to Sears in a metal filing cabinet. This guy was, I can't even. Then began the more experimenting stuff. So in June of 1990, so let's see, June. So the month after, this guy is just,
he's out of control.
Yeah, he's out of control. It's like not stopping. He's, oh man. So he killed a man named Edward Smith and attempted to preserve the skull. He placed it in the freezer in hopes that it would dry it out. And when that didn't work, he put it in the oven where it exploded.
Everyone knows you can't put skulls in ovens. Come on.
Soon after he propositioned an Ernest Miller, he attempted to drug him, but didn't have enough sleeping pills. So this is the first time that he ended up having to straight up slash someone. And he sliced his neck open like a crazy person. And again, took photos of the body, then dismembered it. He kept the heart, biceps, and flesh of the legs in plastic bags and then put them in the fridge for later. Obviously for later, as he probably ate them. He preserved Miller's skeleton using the tips that his father taught him as a kid. And he painted... This
is so horribly tragic.
Yeah, and he painted and coated the skull in enamel. So it's like he was making these things decorations. It's just so fucked up. Then there was David Thomas on September 24th of 1990, who Dahmer states he wasn't attracted to, because that's a big thing that you have to know. Like, I wasn't attracted to him. So he just straight up killed him. He didn't do anything else but kill him and dismember him because he wasn't attracted to him. Like, what? He didn't even keep anything as a memento except for the photos of the dismemberment process. That's it. Because he was like, I'm not attracted to him. I don't need to keep anything.
Couldn't you just left him the fuck alone then?
Exactly. But it's like he won't stop. And then Dahmer went, after David Thomas, he went 5 months without killing anyone, which I think is like the longest amount of time, other than, you know, when he went to military service, all that stuff. He just wasn't having any luck with it, though. So between the last killing and then the 5 months, he just wasn't able to lure anyone in. Not that he didn't try, he just wasn't successful. His probation officer was being told by Dahmer that he was having bouts of anxiety and depression and was even having suicidal thoughts. It's just like the killing isn't keeping the bad thoughts at bay. Like, what are you even doing? I don't understand.
I mean, he had to train himself to view people as like objects of pleasure.
Maybe he should just stop drinking, stop murdering, and get help. There's gotta be some mental facility out there, you know?
It's just like once you're on the path he's on and he's this far gone, like there's no exit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the exit is just to turn himself in. We'd still be talking about it the exact same way, but the death toll will be lower.
Yeah. So February 1991 saw the return of Dahmer. He killed Curtis Straughter, keeping various body parts. On April 7th was the first acid experiment, and it was his attempt at creating like the perfect submissive specimen or like a zombie type thing. He came across Errol Lindsay, who identified as heterosexual. He wasn't even gay. Dahmer drugged him, and this is the gross. So if you guys want to skip this part, you guys can just press the button a couple times. I'll give you a second. But so now this is really gross. He drilled a hole in this guy's skull and poured hydrochloric acid into it. And Dahmer claims that Lindsay woke up afterwards stating, quote, "I have a headache. What time is it?" End quote. And to which Dahmer further drugged him and then strangled him. It's like he was still awake. What I just don't understand.
This is so horrible.
Yeah. Then the neighbors began complaining of the smells coming from his apartment. And his excuses were a broken freezer or all his tropical fish dying. I don't get it. Who believes a story like that? Like, hey, all my tropical fish are dying.
Maybe now with how popular true crime is, you might think differently, but like you wouldn't jump to like, I'm pretty sure it's rotting flesh and corpses.
Yeah. I do believe that now is a bigger time of true crime where everyone's
afraid.
Right. Anyway, okay. So the most disturbing incident that makes me feel like my hope in humanity is just dead is what happens to Conorak Syntha-Symphony. And on May 26, 1991, he was 14 years old. He was a child, and Dahmer lured him to his apartment where he drugged him and then performed another round of his acid experiment. And he then led the boy to his bedroom where the body of a Tony Hughes was on the floor that he had killed 3 days before that. So it's just bodies starting to pile up. He killed him 3 days before, and when Conorak was unconscious, Dahmer drank a few beers next to him and then left to hit up the bar and then buy more booze. This guy's just an alcoholic. Like, he just can't stop. In the early hours of that next day, so May 27th, Dahmer returned to find Conorak sitting on the corner of 25th and State, where 3 young women were with him, and they had called the police, which is disturbing to listen to, by the way, because they described how messed up this boy looks. And he's obviously not in a safe place. He's butt naked, he's bleeding, he's bruised up, and Dahmer tries to take him back to his apartment, but the women are just like, nah, dog, you fuck right off. And so the police arrive. So there's John Balcerzak and Joseph Gabrish, or Gabrish. Dahmer tells them it's just his 19-year-old boyfriend who's just way too drunk after their fight. So Conorak was trying to get away from Dahmer, but the police officers told the women to mind their own business, supposedly telling them to shut the hell up and to butt out. And I don't know if it's a racially charged thing at the women or what, but the men just let Dahmer take him.
Or a sexist thing. Or maybe these cops, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here, we're like, we are going to stick up for this young gay couple, and these bitches need to back off.
Yeah, I could see that.
I'm just trying to put a positive spin on such a horrible story.
So according to the officers, they say that he wasn't a kid, but was an adult, and that he wasn't, and that he was the boyfriend, and that Dahmer was totally sober, so they just let him take the boy. And they even walked Dahmer to his door, right, with this kid, to show them that they were lovers. Dahmer showed the Polaroids he had taken earlier of the kid.
Yeah, because that proves it.
Right. I'm just like, who is it? I guess these cops were just like, looks legit. Let's bounce. I'm good. They showed us pictures. They're obviously together, whatever. One of the officers even told him to, quote unquote, take good care of Conorak. And once the officers left, Dahmer then injected more acid, which ended up killing the kid. He took the next day off work to dismember the 2 bodies and then kept both skulls. So these officers just took him back. What the hell? I can't even. He escaped. This kid was bleeding, and the cops were just like, yeah, just take him back.
He had
whatever.
a hole in his fucking head that had acid poured into it.
I'm sure they didn't even look that close.
Oh my God.
So then he killed Matt Turner, Oliver Lacey, and Joseph Braidhoft in the span of 3 weeks. He killed 3 people.
So his slump is officially over at this point.
It's like he's accelerating, you know? He used his general MO of the strangling and drugging. He also killed Jeremiah Weinberger within that time frame as well, except he tried injecting boiling water this time. He then went into a coma and died 2 days after that initial injection. So he's just doing whatever, like science experiments on people. The downfall of Dahmer, though, came on July 22nd, 1991, when Tracy Edwards was lured to Dahmer's apartment, and Tracy did not want to go down easy. Dahmer tried to handcuff Edwards, but wasn't able to cuff both his hands together. He made sure to remember every single detail of this house, from the boxes of acid on the floor to the 57-gallon drum in the corner that smelled rancid, to the posters on the wall, and even the fucking movie that was playing. It was Exorcist 3, by the way.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so Edwards remembered everything. He talked Dahmer out of attacking him, repeating that he was Dahmer's friend and that he wouldn't run. So he kind of just took advantage of Dahmer's lack of focus.
And his loneliness, his epic, horrible loneliness.
And when the opportunity arose, he just took advantage of the fact that his hands weren't tied and punched him in the face and then ran out the front door. And he was able to get the attention of police on the corner of North 25th Street. He explained to them what happened, as he still had the handcuffs attached to one of his wrists. And both entered the apartment, where Dahmer tried to talk his way out of it again. But when the officers entered the bedroom, they saw an open drawer chock full of Polaroids, many of which were the dismemberment process ones. And so one of the officers, Rolf Mueller, noticed that the photos were taken within the apartment. So he noticed all the background stuff and was like, this is real. Yeah, this is real. So when he went to the living room to show his partner Robert Roth about the pictures, Dahmer started fighting with the officers, but obviously he was overpowered and taken into custody. And then they found a fresh head in the fridge. And when Dahmer turned to the officers after they found this head, he was just like, quote, "For what I did, I should be dead," end quote. So he knew what he's doing is totally wrong. Further searching found 4 heads in the kitchen, 7 skulls. Some were painted and bleached in his bedroom closet. And there was blood on the tray at the bottom of the fridge, that catches everything.
Yeah.
He also had 2 hearts, an arm muscle in plastic bags in the fridge, and in the freezer they found a whole bunch of human organs, and then there was even flesh that had stuck to the ice at the bottom of the freezer. Gross. Within the apartment, they also found 2 whole skeletons, a pair of hands, 2 severed peens, and a mummified scalp. And in that big 57-gallon drum had 3 torsos in it that were getting like melted by acid. So this guy was super, super fucked up. This is so much worse than Ed Gein, who just took the skin. And
he was
stuff.
Still pretty horrible.
Yeah, but he didn't murder people like that.
Different level.
There were a total of 74 photos of Dahmer's victims. The chief medical examiner described the scene as more of a museum. I assume like an ode to murder type thing instead of a crime scene, because I'm sure everything was nice and neat that he put away. And oh my gosh. Over the 2 weeks after his arrest, Dahmer was questioned by a detective, Patrick Kennedy. Interviews of Dahmer total over 60 hours. And it's just messed up how nonchalant he is about it, how he talks in such a monotone voice about everything. And I don't know. He admitted to the murders of the 17 men. He said he'd been quote unquote, completely swept along with his compulsion for killing. He stated, quote, "It was an incessant and never-ending desire to be with someone at whatever cost. Someone good-looking, really nice-looking. It just filled my thoughts all day long," end quote. It's just, what? I can't process. He also admitted to cooking and eating some of the victims.
Gross.
Yeah. So he stated that he was trying to build an altar with all the skulls. He really kind of was trying to build his own little museum of all this stuff. Dahmer pleaded guilty to 15 murders. They couldn't charge him with Steve Tuomi or Tracy Edwards because he claimed to have no memory of doing so for Tuomi, and then he never actually killed Tracy Edwards. Opposing counsels during his final trial were trying to decide whether or not Dahmer was in his right mind. He was diagnosed with necrophilia by multiple individuals. A Dr. Carls Wallstrom diagnosed him with borderline personality disorder and a schizotypical personality disorder, necrophilia, and a psychotic disorder. So this guy was just, he has all these things.
Yeah, he has a smorgasbord of disorders.
Also the fact that he was an alcoholic. Prosecution refused to accept this argument. A forensic psychiatrist named Dr. Philip Resnick testified that because he had live partners, he didn't suffer from necrophilia because he slept with these live people. He just ended up killing them afterwards, which makes total sense to me. Other experts...
Oh, that makes total sense.
No, just
I'm just kidding.
Just the fact that he doesn't have necrophilia because he did sleep with live people. He just... He did drug them, though, so maybe it's a little different because they're not active.
Moving?
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I didn't think about that till just now. Other experts say he was absolutely calculating, which he was, and absolutely cunning. He knew what he was doing, luring men over and over again with that same MO of, hey, I'll pay you for this. Like, he knew what he was doing. Another forensic psychiatrist named Park Dietz stated that if the murders were impulsive, Dahmer wouldn't have had to drink to commit them. But because he did, it's like he had to lower his inhibition to work himself up to it. But it's like he was an alcoholic already.
For like his whole life.
Yeah. The trial only lasted 2 weeks, resulting in him being sane and aware of the 15 murders. He was sentenced to life plus 10 years, then another 70 years. And then the death punishment had been abolished in Wisconsin in 1853, so that wasn't really an option. They were just like, you're going to be in jail forever. He then had to go to Ohio for the murder of Stephen Hicks, and that's when he got another life sentence for that one. Luckily for Dahmer, though, his parents still wanted to see him, which is crazy to me, but they were able to exchange hugs and goodbyes before he had to start his stint in jail. His mother also kept weekly phone calls with him afterwards.
Now is when she shows him the attention his entire life she neglected to give him.
On November 28th, 1994, Dahmer was beaten to death by Christopher Scarver, who was a fellow convicted murderer at the Columbia Correctional Institution, which is a maximum facility prison in Wisconsin. Scarver beat Dahmer and another murderer, Jesse Anderson, to death with a broken piece of exercise equipment. He wasn't in jail for very long, it seems, like before he totally got murdered. I was reading that it's because he was kind of a dick to other people. Like, he would make fun of other people and poke at them and stuff like that. He was totally apathetic about the whole thing. He told his mom that he didn't care if anything happened to him, which I totally see as... It's just that his whole life he must have hated himself. He must have hated who he was. He must have hated what he was. Like, he knew that maybe there's something wrong with me because these are the things that turn me on, you know?
And like he said to the cops when he got arrested, I should be dead for what I did. Like, he's legitimately just telling his mom, like, I don't care what happens to me at this point. Like, he's just thrown in the towel because he felt so, and he kind of was, obviously so, very, very broken.
Yeah. Maybe he did all these things because he wanted to do it to himself. Like, he was like, I don't want to live anymore. It's like projecting, you know? There was a movie that came out a couple years ago called My Friend Dahmer. If you guys want to check it out. It happened to be based on the book of the same name. It only has a 6.2 out of 10 though on IMDb, so I don't know if it's actually really good. I know there was a point in time where I wanted to watch it because I was really, really curious. So if you're curious about it, watch it. It's more about his origins. Kind of reminds me of the fact that we need to watch The Joker because I want to know if it's along the same lines.
It just came out though. So.
Yeah. Side note, I've been playing Prison Architect if you guys are into video games and stuff, and that shit is addicting if you want to build your own prison.
They have some, it's like bizarre storylines about murderers too.
Right. And then that's the story of the Milwaukee cannibal / monster.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is intense as shit.
He is a monster.
I do remember when he got killed because people were so happy about it.
Yeah, his mom came out and was like, "Are you guys happy now?"
People were.
He's dead?
I remember people talking about it. I mean, I grew up in Northwest Indiana, which is very, very close to Milwaukee, like maybe 2 hours away. And like everyone knew who he was. And when that happened, people were like, he got what he deserved, you know?
Yeah.
And I'll remember that because I was like 9 and hearing about the death penalty debate probably for the first time, where I'm just like, okay, well, he killed people, they kill him, right? And they're like, no, that's not how that works all the time, and it depends on where you're at. And it's like, wow, like and like you're a kid, you don't know how to enter that debate or what morale you want to impose, but it's like, it's hard to tell people when something like that happens, like, you shouldn't be happy, like this monster is gone from the world. Even just the fact that you stated like that one person he was not tried for, even though he did kill him because he didn't remember. It's like, from a prosecutor standpoint, they're like, well, we got him dead to rights on 15 other murders. We don't need to worry about that. But what about that person's fucking family?
Right.
Where it's like, this monster killed our son, and you guys are just dismissing it because it's like, well, we don't need to try him for this one. Like, we already got him. Like, he's admitted to all the other ones, and hey, he doesn't remember it. It's no big deal, right? It's like, no, their kid's still dead, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that's horrific for me to hear. So I remember this a lot from when I was a kid and hearing about him talked a ton. So it's definitely one where it's like, I never really did any research on it because like I kind of heard about it growing up and I was like, that's enough for me. And then the older you get and you realize people have these fascinations with these events that have happened that when you're, you know, hearing about them at the time, they just seem horrific. And now
people have a morbid curiosity, I think
now. Everyone has this curiosity, at least this is just me, where I want to know what led to this, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just such a horribly sad life, but like I was saying earlier, I really expected there to be some form of like torture or punishment that wasn't deserved, or some
when he was a kid or something
or
like
some form of like sexual assault. And I'm not shocked, but I am surprised that that wasn't present, given like how truly horrific the things that he did were.
Yeah.
So it's really good research. So good
thanks.
job.
Thanks, Internet.
Yeah. So I usually say like good stuff at this point, but it's like horrific stuff.
Yeah, horrific stuff.
Right on. So cool. Serial Killer Month continues, just chugging away at these really long, really good, interesting, well-researched, and horribly depressing topics.
Thanks.
So good stuff. I think that's just about everything we're going to have for episode 96. For the folks who want to send us your stories, please feel free to do so. Email storytime@scarish.com, or you can go to our website, scarish.com, and click on Contact Us, or hit us up on social media, facebook.com/scarishpodcast. Instagram is @scarishpodcast, and Twitter is @scarishpod. Robin, for folks who want to become patrons, how can they do so?
You can head on over to patreon.com/scarishpodcast. Those are monthly donations that help us keep this podcast going.
Indeed.
We have a whole bunch of different tiers. Tiers start at $1. So you can check that out. And then we do have coffee, ko-fi.com/scarishpodcast. And those are one-time donations. All those are going to be helping us upgrade our studio setup and this little computer here that's chugging away.
Indeed. So thank you all for listening. We appreciate you. We know that you guys are fans of true crime also, and we're starting to get into some of that stuff. So you know what? A lot of you folks don't listen till the very end. A few of you do. It's a very minor segment of our listener base, but I will say I have a topic for next week already. I spoke with someone with insider information on Saturday on something that is absolutely fucking bizarre.
It's so cool.
And I am going to be covering it. So expect to hear something really, really good that sounds like a horror movie, but it's actually happening and it's still unfolding. I'm really excited to get to it. So stay tuned for that. That said, great job, Robin. Good topic. I hope you folks enjoyed the Montauk Project. And yeah, that's everything we got. So Robin, sign us out.
Keep on creeping on, and we'll talk to you guys later.